Hello and welcome to History Respawned. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. On today's episode, we'll be looking at Assassin's Creed Mirage, and we'll be focusing in particular on the game's History of Baghdad feature, which, like older Assassin's Creed games, is part of the in-game Codex. This Codex includes entries on 5 different topics: economy, belief in daily life, government, art and science, and court life. Our guest on today's episode is Dr. Glaire Anderson, who served as one of the historical advisors on the History of Baghdad feature. Dr. Anderson is a senior lecturer in Islamic art at the University of Edinburgh. Her research focuses on the art and architecture of medieval Islamic societies in the Middle East and North Africa. She is also the founder of the university's Digital Lab for Islamic Visual Culture and Collections. Glaire, welcome to History Respawned.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
And I guess I should say welcome to 9th century Baghdad as well. So Glaire, just to start out, I'm wondering about your background and what attracted you to studying medieval Islamic societies, art, and architecture.
Yes. Well, my background is quite mixed background. I came to the study of medieval Islamic architecture and art in a very roundabout way. So I think because I started off as an English major, actually, and I didn't move into Islamic architecture and art until I was a PhD student. But the thing that first, I guess the first awareness I had around medieval Islamic societies was reading a book when I was a kid. I think I was in elementary school when I read a book called The Walking Drum by Louis L'Amour, which is set in the 12th century Islamic Mediterranean. And I loved that book. I really loved it, and it really sparked my imagination as a kid. So, then later when I was a master's student studying architectural history, I had to take what they called a non-Western course as a degree requirement. And that gave me a chance to follow that interest that had been sparked in me as a kid from reading this novel. And yeah, basically that was it. Once I saw those buildings in this course I took on Islamic art and architecture, I was just completely floored by what I saw, and decided when I went back for a PhD that that's what I wanted to study.
Yeah, what an interesting backstory there, Louis L'Amour.
Yeah,
yeah,
you wouldn't expect it, would you?
yeah, I would.
He's so associated with the American West, but yeah, if you've ever read this novel, The Walking Drum, it was a huge influence on me as a kid.
Interesting. Yeah, of course, being from Texas, very familiar with Louis L'Amour, but I was not aware of that book. So that's fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, I recommend it. I'd be interested to hear what you think if you ever read it.
I will check it out. So, we've got your background. I'm wondering, do you have any past experience with video games prior to your kind of help with Ubisoft on this title?
Yes, I mean, as a researcher, when I was doing my first book, over a decade ago, I was using the Unity game engine to visualize medieval Islamic villa and its landscape, and also some of its furnishings for my first book, which was about the villas of 10th century Islamic Spain, 9th and 10th century Islamic Spain. So as a researcher, I was thinking about video game engines as a useful tool for, kind of experimenting and working out some of the theories that I had for my book. But prior to that, prior to starting the PhD, I, played lots of video games. I had to give that up because I didn't have time once I started the PhD. But that was partly because I had a 4-month-old baby, my son, when I started the PhD. So between being a new parent and basically entering a new field and learning how to become a scholar in a new field, I had zero time for playing video games once I started the PhD. But, while I was doing the research using Unity, for my first book, at that time, my son, who was around 12, had started, playing video games on his own, and
Hmm.
seeing what my son was playing, including Assassin's Creed, and being introduced to, what he was showing me really helped me understand at that point as a researcher what was possible for games. I mean, it made me start to be aware that games could be much more than what I had previously been using them for, which was, just playing and having fun.
Hmm. So, Blair, what was your experience like working with the developers at Ubisoft? How did they approach you? What was it like trying to contribute to this History of Baghdad feature? What was your experience like?
Mm. Well, it was a great experience, a very intense, a very intense experience, and a very intense learning curve. Um, and I'll give you a little bit of a sense of the timeline. I actually had reached out to Ubisoft myself before I knew anything about their plans for Mirage, because I was interested in what they were doing around the Discovery Tour and working with museums, and cultural heritage institutions. Um, and so I had reached out to them because something that piqued my interest in Valhalla was, having Basim and Hytham as NPCs who were, NPCs from the
Hmm.
um, Abbasid Caliphate. And, that immediately made me think, oh, let me reach out to them and see if they would like or need any support around the medieval Islamic material, if they're doing things with museums and cultural heritage, because the connections between the Islamic lands and the Vikings is a research interest of mine, as part of my interest in global connections between Islamic societies and non-Islamic societies. So I had reached out to them about that, um, and then, months later, they came back to me and said that they wanted to have a conversation with me about an undisclosed project, which turned out to be Mirage.
Hmm. And so when they were kind of telling you about Mirage, was there kind of any particular area that they were maybe looking for advice on? I imagine they weren't asking you for help with game mechanics or anything like that, but was there any particular kind of historical area that they were kind of maybe struggling with?
Mm. Yes, I mean, when they first approached me, they were interested in getting advice around, all the various aspects of Islamic civilization, history, and art, that ended up being topics in the Codex. So they were looking for help with that. And they were also looking for some feedback on the initial concept art for the game. So from my perspective as a specialist in the art and architecture of the Caliphal period, I was able to give them some feedback on the initial concept art, but I was also able to give them guidance on all of the other aspects, visual, starting with visual culture, but then going into all of these other thematic areas that they were particularly interested in, around, the economy, daily life, um, just all of those themes,
Hmm.
science and so forth,
Hmm.
that became so important to the Codex. Yeah. But in terms of the experience of working with the developers, one of the things that was new about the way Ubisoft worked with me, as I understand it from Maxime Durand, this was a first for the franchise, was that they had the luxury of basically taking an 8-week graduate seminar with me as part of the pre-production process. And it's out of that very intense 8 weeks that we spent together, with them asking me questions and me and my team coming back to respond to the questions and the topics that they were interested in, and bringing all of our visual material and historical material to them. Out of that 8 weeks, that that fed into then what happened in production, with creating the codex entries and all of the rest of it. So it was extremely intense, but also a really valuable conversation across 3 different sectors. So higher education, or the academic sector, the game development side, and also bringing in all of these museum partners as well. So very intense, but a really fruitful dialogue.
Wow, that's amazing. So, did you have a syllabus for them? Did you have readings? Did you have any assignments for the listeners?
Yes, I think I threw a lot of readings at Maxime, and initially at Maxime, but also then at Raphael Wayland, who was the Mirage historian. So I started off, the discussion started with Maxime, and I was suggesting a lot of reading to him, because I know that for outsiders, if you're not someone who has trained in the history of, say, Islamic studies, and in particular medieval Islamic art history, this is it can be a very difficult subject to really enter. In some ways, it's a very inward-looking field still. So part of that was introducing Maxime Durand to that field through readings, through discussion of the kinds of topics that he was interested in, and then following that up with Raphael, again, bringing them lots of readings and lots of suggestions, lots of primary sources as well as secondary sources, as well as all of the visual material.
Wow, that's incredible. That sounds like a great course just on its own.
Yeah, it was a great course, because I had great students, because Maxime and Raphael and the other members of the team came back to us with great questions. I mean, they were the best kind of students in that they asked me and my team questions that hadn't occurred to us before, that we were forced to go and think about and research and come back to them. So it was very much it was definitely a two-way conversation. It wasn't just me, kind of talking at them. It was a much more collaborative kind of seminar, and that made it intense, but also really interesting.
Excellent. Yeah. Game developer historical boot camp. This is
Yes, I
gotta
think.
be it's gotta be a first, I think.
Well, apparently it was for the franchise, which I hadn't really appreciated when we were, in the midst of doing it. But I thought that was interesting to find that out afterward.
Yeah. Well, and we've had Maxime Durand on the show several times, and his kind of interest, had natural interest in history, had kind of worked well, I think, for earlier Assassin's Creed games. many of those set in North America, for instance, or in Western Europe. But I think, like you were saying, with this era of history that they were interested in including, it really takes a bit more effort, especially if it's something you haven't studied
Hmm.
before. And I would say that not just for the game developers, but even for myself. I took one medieval historiography class in graduate school, and I was like, okay, boy, that was hard. I had briefly considered being a medieval historian, and I was not put off by the reading so much as it was how much work it takes to kind of extract knowledge about this era, particularly with the language requirements, having to learn multiple languages, having to kind of be aware of multiple sources, getting a hold of those sources can often be difficult. And so I
Hmm.
scurried back. I scurried back to studying the British Empire, reading in English, reading printed documents, and that's where I've stayed ever since. But it can take a lot of work, and I'm glad to hear that the developers were open to your instruction and that you were there to kind of to guide them along. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, I was, I absolutely feel everything that you just said. And that's actually why I reached out to them as soon as I realized that they were making that connection to medieval Islamic societies and to the Abbasid Caliphate in Valhalla, because, as soon as I saw that, it made me think, if they are going to do anything with this in the future, I think they're going to need help with this. And, I don't think that there are very many academics who, in my field, who both work on that particular period, the Caliphal period, who also happen to have some experience using, video game engines as a research tool.
Mhm.
So I thought, okay, I have to step up here and bring my slight edge of knowledge to Ubisoft if they want it, because I know that they're going to have a steep challenge ahead of them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I could say, as somebody who's been covering historical video games for the past decade, and talking to a lot of historians about video games, that your assumption that you're one of the few who could have done this, I think that's absolutely true. I don't know many historians who work with game development tools or even are aware of what they are. So, yeah,
Mm.
you were well placed, I think,
Hmm.
to help with this project.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been trying to raise awareness in my own corner of the field about this kind of work, and I think yeah, I think I've been successful. So hopefully we'll have more people, who are able to engage in this kind of work in the interest of making better games in the future.
100%, yes. Um, so I've got the screen back up here, so I was gonna start up again.
Uh-huh,
But
great.
this is
Okay.
the Codex section, and so as a longtime player of Assassin's Creed games, I was very excited to see a return of the Codex. And in previous Assassin's Creed games, they had split off the historical entries into Discovery Tour, as you had mentioned with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But in earlier Assassin's Creed games, those historical entries had been a part of the main game Codex. And the Codex here divided into a database of kind of characters and locations, tutorial entries, so you can remember how to assassinate targets.
Mm,
And then
mm-hmm.
lastly, what we've been talking about here is the History of Baghdad feature. And again, it's divided into different themes and topics, different sections. And you can see I've kind of gone through and done a fair few in art and science, and then beliefs, daily life, economy, government. I haven't yet gotten into court life quite so yet, but
Hmm.
I have, just as a player and as a historian, I've been impressed with the Codex in the sense that it does kind of the good work that the Discovery Tour modes have done, where you've got a kind of a historical entry here, kind of almost a encyclopedia entry, and then it also highlights some visual culture, as you were mentioning, along with the inventory number, the sometimes the archival access number. I
Hmm.
suppose just in case game players want to go back and to do some peer review of the game developers and check to see if these access numbers and archival numbers are correct. But yeah,
Well,
and
no, not at all. We included those because, at least from my perspective, we want players who are interested in the actual artifacts and learning more about this period to be able to go to the museums and see
mhm,
these artifacts for themselves, or see, other artifacts that are similar for themselves. So this is really for the players who want to go deeper.
mhm. Yeah, and so we've got all sorts of different topics included: healthcare, paper making, scientific method, singing and poetry. And I'm just wondering, as you were advising Ubisoft on this project, and you were helping them dig up some of these materials, and giving them background readings for some of these entries. I'm wondering, did you have any specific hopes for what the players would get out of this? I mean, in particular, thinking about the setting for this game, ninth century Baghdad is not often a setting, not just for a video game, but for any kind of historical fiction that would be popular in the West in particular. So I'm just wondering, what were you hoping? What were your hopes going into this project and with these entries?
Mm. Yeah, that's such an important question. I hoped that players would get out of it three things. I mean, first, I wanted them to have a more accurate understanding of the medieval period. So, from my perspective, when I look at history video games, or fantasy video games that are set in, the medieval period, by large, the default setting for these medieval video games is Northern Europe.
Hmm.
And that was one of the things that really troubled me, and which also led me to reach out to Ubisoft and to found my digital lab, actually. So I wanted players to have a more accurate understanding of the medieval period, in a way that decenters the role that Northern Europe has. I think in the public imagination, that equates the medieval period with Northern Europe and doesn't really see all of the other things that are happening in the medieval period that are so important for understanding global history. So I wanted them to also appreciate, hopefully, to play the game and appreciate medieval Islamic civilization as a global phenomenon, that has intellectual and cultural and artistic significance, for players around the globe.
Hmm.
And I wanted them to be aware too that it wasn't hermetically sealed away, right? That it wasn't, that ninth century Baghdad was an inward looking society. I wanted them to be very aware and to see that Islamic civilization and Abbasid Baghdad, and the Caliphal period, these are, times and places that are very much connected to other societies of the time,
Hmm.
including Europe, and including, Viking Age, Scandinavia and Britain, but also China, for instance. So these are all things that I teach when I teach students about art in the age of the caliphs. These are the things that I'm teaching them about. And so I just wanted to reach a broader audience who may not have, the privilege of going to an institution like University of Edinburgh to
Right.
study with a specialist in the period. I wanted to really get this knowledge out of the academy and make it available to more people who might not otherwise have the chance to learn about this society and its history.
Right, right. That's a fantastic goal, and one that is very popular here at History Respawned. And, going off your point about kind of expanding knowledge about this era, but then also diversifying that knowledge, one of my favorite entries here in the Codex in the government section is this one about diplomacy in the
Mm,
Abbasid period. And I think it
hmm
gets pretty well to the point that you're making of this being, a global era, for the Abbasids, at a place where there were diplomats and traders from all around the world, and global connections being forged, and not just connections related to Western Europe or Northern Europe, but all around the world. So we've got to mention here of China, and we've got, of course, mentioned here of Charlemagne and the, excuse me, Carolingian court. But I love the fact that it kind of expands the scope of knowledge related to this era, because I feel like, even if you were to take a Western Civ course or a survey course in the Western world, most of the mention of Islamic civilization, Islamic societies, would come through a discussion of the Crusades. So it would be about militaries and generals, and you wouldn't necessarily always get these opportunities to talk about different topics, different themes, different subjects. So I love the fact that that's included in this codex.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And that is one of my favorite Codex entries as well. And it's a topic that I've written a lot about, and it's really near and dear to my heart. So it's great to hear you appreciate it too.
Oh yeah. Oh, and then this one, the Emporium of the World in the economy section.
Hmm
Just absolutely loved well, the entry, talking about the different areas of the world where they were bringing in materials. And actually, before I started playing with you, I just walked through the city bazaar and seen some of the kind of wares on sale there. But I just absolutely love this bowl here.
Mm-hmm.
I just think this is so striking and so amazing. And yeah, this is definitely one of those moments where I was taking a photograph of the image credits here, but just be like, oh, maybe if I get a chance to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I could hunt this down and see it, because I just think it's just an amazing piece.
Absolutely, yes. And so, all the students who have taken my Art in the Age of the Caliphs class, they'll immediately recognize that kind of splashware from where we talk about,
Hmm.
the Abbasid and China trading connections, and how those trading connections impacted the works that artisans and craftspeople were making on either side, which is fascinating to think about that happening in the 9th century, but it absolutely was.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, looking at these entries, and I haven't collected them all, but there's a dozen or so for each of these themes and topics. Were there any themes and topics that were kind of left on the cutting room floor? I mean, because I imagine you can't include absolutely everything that you're aware of, or all the topics that you might want to broach. And I'm just wondering, is there anything here that you felt, could have, maybe been bolstered, or any topics that maybe were left behind? Or do you think the coverage is about what you would want to present to players unfamiliar with this time period?
Mm. Well, the coverage is extensive. I have to say that I was really impressed that they included almost everything that
Hmm.
we talked about, which is amazing, really, the scope that they gave us to put all of this material into the game is really impressive to me. with that said, though, there is one thing that I would have loved to have had room for in the Codex, which it's in there, but it's in there in a more diffuse way than I would have put it in there. And that is just the topic of the Abbasid remains from Samarra. So you will see monuments and decoration and artifacts from 9th century Samarra in different codex entries. So we sort of spread those around. But that was one of the ones that got left on the cutting room floor as they were, making the decision about what to keep and what to cut. In favor of keeping some other entries, we cut an entry that would have given players much more information about Samarra and about the actual, monuments and decoration from Samarra. But
Okay.
it's still there. It's still there in a diffuse kind of way. So maybe that's better because players then have to go through all of the codex entries and find them.
Yeah, and you can see I haven't done the work yet to find all these entries, but just so the players are aware, these codex entries, they come up on the map, and here we're just outside of the palace in the harem, and you can see one of these historical sites, and so it shows up almost as a white ball of light. It looks like a glitch almost, and you approach it, and then you hold down a button, and it gives you the historical entry that you could then go into the codex. So I do like what the developers did here with these entries. I as a historian, I hope to gather up all these, just on my own, just for fun.
Mhm.
But for players, they do entice maybe players who are not as interested in the history. They do entice them to collect all of these historical sites by offering up gear, in-game gear as a reward. And so it does give you a gameplay reason to go and collect all of these historical markers, in addition to the wonderful wealth of historical knowledge that maybe would entice a historian like me, but maybe not for all players. We can't assume that.
Mm. Well, the developers did create one award. I don't know if anyone has received it yet, so I won't say anything about it, but they
Okay.
did create an award that I was pretty excited about when they showed it to me, and they told me that I have bragging rights for this
Oh,
award, and
okay.
that I had inspired this award. So I don't know. I haven't collected all of the entries myself yet, but I'm super excited to get this reward.
Okay, well, that's something that's going to interest me as well.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, I mean, you just mentioned you've been playing a bit of this game, and I'm just wondering, what has your experience been like exploring this game, and do you have any kind of favorite bits? Maybe not necessarily of the story, but any favorite parts of the game world, the setting here in Baghdad?
Mm. Yes, I mean, I am playing it now, and I think, I mean, it won't surprise you to know that finding those codex entries in the game world is something that's really exciting and meaningful for me. Just seeing, because as you know, we just don't have anything left from 9th century Baghdad. Just the fact that they have visualized the city and they've made it a visualization that includes, visual references
Hmm.
from other times and places across the whole history of Islamic art and architecture. It's like a beautiful introduction to the history of Islamic art and architecture in game form, and
Hmm.
that to me, because an important part of my research was about how do you visualize um, fragmented or decontextualized or just vanished remains of medieval Islamic architecture and art and landscapes. How do you do that using game engines? To me, seeing how they have done it is a dream come true, and that's very exciting for me. But I guess aside from that, just seeing the game world and seeing how they took, what I brought them in the seminar, and how they then put that through the creative director's creative vision for the game and came up with something, completely fantastical and imaginative, but wonderful and evocative. Besides all of that, I think the thing that is particularly wonderful for me to see is everything around science. Because, so for instance, the fact that it's the Banu Musa that you go to
Mhm.
when you have to get your gear upgraded and things like that. The science and the connection between science and art, that is the topic of my new book that's about to come out,
Mm.
which the Banu Musa are in my book. And so, so many of the things that I was thinking about, because I had just written about them in my book, I guess come out in this game, because that's what I was talking to the developers about. Same thing with, all of the material and information about women that's in the game. There's a quest about, the concubines quest as well. So
Yes.
women and concubines are something that I spent a lot of time writing about before I started writing my book on science and art. So, seeing how things that I have been writing about and things that I brought to the developers as an academic, how they have kind of woven all of those things, not only in the Codex, but throughout the game, is just an incredible experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I speaking of art and science, I had just finished up a quest at the House of Wisdom, which is something I was unfamiliar with. But this kind of academy, at least in the game, is located, I think, in the kind of the northwest area of the city. I think it's, yeah, here it is, up here. And so that was interesting seeing, kind of uh, Muslim scholars at work on manuscripts, and then concerns, big concerns, at least in the mission that I played, with the potential of fire, out breaking out and destroying these manuscripts, and people, in-game fictional people, having an agenda to restrict the flow of knowledge. So as a historian, I really enjoyed that side quest uh,
Mm-hmm.
for this game. And yeah, I'm looking forward to finding more of these historical entries. I've only, comparatively, I've found very few, but it gives me more of a reason to keep playing in order to get the rest of them.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you enjoy them as much as I'm enjoying them. I just finished that same quest myself, and I thought that was super interesting.
So is there kind of a last question here? Is there any potential for you to use this in any of your classes? So are you gonna have upcoming syllabi that require students to play parts of this game, or maybe watch videos about this game? What are you planning on doing with this game with your own instruction?
Yeah, well, this term I am teaching my Art in the Age of the Caliphs course. So I actually built in assignments, options for students who did want to engage with the game. I went to the game launch event, the art exhibition, and game launch event in Bordeaux when that happened last month. And I gave students the option to write about the art of Mirage exhibition if they were able to travel to Bordeaux to see it. I've given them the option to to write up their own critiques of the depiction of caliphal art and architecture in the game. How does what they see in the game match up to the actual monuments and artifacts that they learn about in my class?
Hmm.
Yeah, so I plan to integrate this into all of my teaching, because actually it fits into all my courses, and could be really useful, I think, for giving students a way to think about the utility of this medium
Hmm.
to understanding the past,
Hmm.
specifically through game environment.
Hmm. And like you said, it does such an amazing job of giving students at least a sense of context and of lived environments, and even if the cityscape is not a one-to-one recreation, it still goes a really long way in kind of providing them with something to bounce their ideas off of, to bounce their imaginations off of.
Mm.
Even better than I think many texts uh, could possibly do. So it's an amazing resource. It's an amazing line on your CV. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. As I said, it was a dream come true, yes, and an amazing experience all around, for sure.
Well, on that note, that does it for this episode of History Respawned. Glaire, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And listeners, if you enjoyed this episode of History Respawned and are interested in seeing more of our work, please visit historyrespawned.com for a back catalog of episodes. And if you really enjoy our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/history respawned. Until next time, goodbye.